not planning on live streaming this.
Okay, so it's just recording, that's fine.
Yeah, and then we're going to look at the quality.
Okay,
And
sounds good.
so, and how is this really fuzzy?
It looks a little fuzzy to me. That doesn't really.
Okay, so we're too far zoomed in on this?
No, that doesn't look too bad.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
All right, yeah, might as well just
start?
Yeah.
All right.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
The early
morning.
bird gets the worm, so we're going to get started. I want to thank you all for coming. Hopefully you've all had a chance to get some good food for your breakfast. If not, it will be there. You can get it later if you need. But I want to get started. We have again another power-packed morning. We're going to be starting with media and the brain with Dr. Daniel Minus, and I will give another introduction, but we had that yesterday, so we're going to hop in with a word of prayer and then get started and turn it over to the Beautiful Minds team. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I want to say thank you for today. Thank you for this chance to get together and learn more of how to have the best mental health possible. So Lord, may we have attentive ears and minds, and may we learn what you'd have us to learn. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
One last thing I forgot is in the back table where you see the basket is where the handouts are and stuff that were yesterday. So if several of you were asking for more of those, it's back there. I think that's all my announcements. Dr. Minus, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning.
Good morning.
It's nice to be able to do this presentation in the morning when our minds are fresh. And we're going to talk about screens and mental illness. And to do that, we're going to stare at a screen. How's that? But you can also look at me, so hopefully that will not increase your risk for mental illness. Well, I'll try to smile and look pretty so that it will help your mental health, right? So this is, I think, in a lot of ways, kind of a hot topic. And for many years, when I was going through my psychiatric residency training around that time, which was 2006 to 2010, there was still a lot of people that were kind of skeptical as far as the impact of media and mental health. But I think in recent years, that's really started to change. Even mainstream researchers and many people across the country, doctors, scientists, etc., are recognizing that screens have a huge impact when it comes to our mental health. And so we're going to look at some of the research today. We're going to also look at some of the things we can do to manage our screen time. Amanda Anguish, later on, she's also going to get into some great ways to manage screen time and how we utilize screens in the home, especially with our children. So first we're going to talk a little bit about an attachment study. So this was a study done on 142 18 to 25-year-olds, and this found that young people readily develop an attachment toward their phones. So when we talk about attachment, what we're talking about there is a bond, a strong bond. This is basically the same language that science would use to describe a relationship between a parent and a child, or even a romantic relationship where you have, a strong bond with that individual. And what we find is that people actually start to develop a strong bond as if our phone actually was either part of us or another entity or important person in our life. And so similar to, an attachment to maybe a parent or a good friend, they would seek the proximity of the phone, often experience great distress on separation. And the interesting thing is that even teens actually think that they have a problem. According to this study from Pew Research, 60% of teens, those between the ages of 13 to 17, say that spending too much time online is a major problem facing their age group, with about 9 in 10 teens dubbing it a problem. More than half of teens say they spend too much time on their cell phones, and 41% say they overdo it on social media. So it's interesting because what do we see with this? We see that you realize you have a problem as a teenager, but you can't do what? you can't stop. What does that remind you of? Addiction, right? So, and this is what we see, that it really becomes an addiction to utilize our phone, and it's the same sort of things that go on in the brain with any addiction. So Robert Lustig, a professor of pediatrics at the University of Southern California and author of The Hacking of the American Mind, says it's not a drug, but it might as well be. It works the same way. It has the same results. And again, Pew's latest research suggests that teens are self-aware, but they're unable to rein themselves in. And part of this also drives significant anxiety. So if teens are separated from their phone, what we find is that the top emotion with not having access to the phone is anxiety, 42%, with girls once again reporting more anxiety from phone deprivation than boys, but boys is also about 35%. And I think, these numbers are a few years old. I think these numbers would go up even higher. And it's not just anxiety. What other sorts of emotions do you think might come up when teens are deprived from their phones? Anger, right? Yes, this is probably the number one, especially with boys, that I've seen, and I've heard stories. I've heard stories from parents that are trying to manage their teens' online consumption, their phone use, and they've, for whatever reason, there's come a point where they've had to take the phone away, and man, they say, I didn't even recognize my teen. It was like they had a complete meltdown, started throwing things, throwing huge temper tantrum. These are, teens that are 16, 17, 18 years old. These aren't 3-year-olds, right? But they're throwing a temper tantrum. Why? Just because they don't have access to their phone. And this is an interesting study where the military in 2011 conducted a study using Snow World, a cartoon virtual reality game set in the Arctic ice, where a series of penguins march back and forth to treat pain in soldiers. Okay, so can you imagine these soldiers who have been injured, they're in pain, and now they're supposed to play this virtual reality game with penguins marching back and forth. And what the amazing thing is, for soldiers in the most severe pain, Snow World worked even better than morphine. So again, we see that there's such a strong physiological effect that devices have on the brain, sometimes even more so than strong opioid painkillers. Now, why do you think this is becoming such a huge problem for teens? Well, there's multiple reasons, but one of the things we really need to look at ourselves is parental modeling. What do I mean by that? Well, as kids are growing up, what are they doing? They're watching us as adults. They're beholding, and as they behold, they become changed. And so if we're walking around, looking at our devices all the time, if we're on the phone all the time, especially with the screen time, and especially if that screen time is interrupting time that should ideally be spent with family and with them, guess what kind of message are they getting? They're getting a message that this is more important. The most important thing is paying attention to the phone, right? And so this is a huge deal. We need to be really careful as parents. So this is, again, part of the research that Pew found on how kids feel about their parents' use of technology. While 72% of parents say their teen is sometimes or often distracted by their phone while having real-life conversations, more than half of teens say the same about their parents. So we need to be very careful. Kids are picking up on this, and they start following those patterns. And part of the issue here is adults, we feel like we can kind of rein it in, which adults are better at reining it in. But kids, because their frontal lobe is not very developed and they don't have self-control, they start copying somewhat, and then it's like once they start using that technology from a physiological standpoint, it becomes almost impossible to break loose from that. And if they're getting essentially programmed early on in life that it's okay to be using devices a lot, and this is how you use your device, it's like this addiction that takes place that is almost impossible to break later on. I say almost because, you know, all things are possible with God, right? But it really is an addiction, and that's what we really need to start understanding. We have to treat it as such. And I'm not anti-technology, okay? I use technology every day. I think it can be a powerful thing. But just like any powerful weapon, we need to use it very safe and learn how to be cautious with it, right? We have to have strict parameters. If I have a handgun or a shotgun, am I just going to be like you walking around willy-nilly with it and, you know, playing around with it and that sort of thing? No, I'm going to be like, this is I'm going to train my children, right? I'm going to say, look, this is a very dangerous weapon. Yes, we have it for protection, et cetera, but here are the rules, and we have to abide by this. And this is the circumstances that we might use this, but in general, this is, you know, we're going to have it locked in the safe, et cetera. And so we have to be careful with technology because it is a powerful weapon. And again, I'm not anti-technology, but we need to understand the power behind it so that we can utilize it correctly. And we also have to develop rules to use it properly as well, both for ourselves and for our children. So just to give you an idea of how much media is actually being used, take a look at this. So this is in 2021, and here we see that mobile, non-voice. So this is not talking on the phone, this is screen time on the mobile phone, over 4 hours a day. And now you can see clearly that this has now eclipsed television time, all right? TV used to be number one, and now it's a lot more about the phone. TV is still number two with over 3 hours. And what we see is over 7 hours total per person. And this actually is accounting for multitasking. And this adds up to many years worth of media time over the lifespan. So if you think about how many hours per day, 7 hours per day, what proportion of our day that is, I mean, that's over 25% of our day, right? And so you think about in a lifetime, how many years are we talking about there? Typically at least 20 years, right? When you think about it. And again, here's another study where this is from the CDC, 8 to 10 years old, 6 hours per day. 11 through 14, 9 hours per day. 15 through 18, 7.5 hours per day. And age 18 plus, 11 hours per day. And typically when they look at these numbers, they're actually not even counting screen time at work. So that's hard to even wrap your mind around, right? Like there's not even enough time in the day, but and pretty much people are on screens more than they're doing anything else. So what's actually going on in the brain when we engage in entertainment media, whether it's TV and movies or other things? So essentially what happens is that it engages what we call the orienting response. So essentially, if you look at this part of the brain right here, the reward circuit, so you get a bunch of dopamine that's being released, and adrenaline on some levels as well. So you get that dopamine released, and this dopamine then in turn stimulates the nucleus accumbens, which we see right here. The nucleus accumbens is part of the emotional center of the brain that gives you that sense of reward. It gives you kind of that high, if you will. And so if you do something else exciting, or even if someone were to engage in some kind of addictive drug, for example, you get a large amount of dopamine hitting this part of the brain, especially the nucleus accumbens, and that's what gives you that sense of a high, okay? And then you also get an excessive amount of dopamine signaling into the prefrontal cortex. Now, when that dopamine signaling occurs in the prefrontal cortex, what do you think happens there? Any thoughts on that? What do you think happens when you get, so you get a lot of dopamine hitting here, that's what gives you that high, that euphoria, and you also get excessive dopamine hitting here in the frontal lobe, which is the logical part of your brain. What do you think happens there?
You want more.
You want more, yes, but what do you think happens specifically to the frontal lobe? It shuts down. That's exactly right, and that's what we see with drugs and also excessive media use, is that when you get that excessive dopamine signaling in the frontal lobe shuts down, okay? So dopamine's not bad. Dopamine helps us with motivation, interest, even as you're here like paying attention to what I'm saying, you're getting dopamine because there's new information coming in, etc. The problem is when there's excessive dopamine release, okay? So dopamine's good, but sometimes too much of a good thing is no longer a good thing. Okay? And that's what we see with media, is that yes, it dumps that dopamine, it feels good, but when we get too much of it, then that shuts down the frontal lobe, it shuts down the reasoning capabilities. And what we see, y'all remember way back, in the 1970s, 60s, television, was it faster or slower? It was quite a bit slower, right? You think about some of these programs like Clipper, Leave It to Beaver. Remember those old programs? The scene changes were a lot slower. It stayed in one scene and then it'd go to the next one. Nowadays, when you watch television or you engage in some sort of media, what do you notice? Quick
3 seconds.
scene changes, right? Yep, very rapid. Someone said what? How many seconds?
3.
3 seconds. Okay, there you go. So every 3 seconds, boom, boom, boom. And what that does, when it's something new, our brain is like, oh, that's interesting. This is new. Let me figure it out. And you get dopamine released. And so the more scene changes that you get, the more dopamine you have released, the more it feels good because you're getting that nucleus accumbens tickle. But the more dopamine that's released in the frontal lobe, what happens? What did we say? It shuts the frontal lobe down. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? What is the frontal lobe responsible for? For reasoning, right? For thinking. And so if our frontal lobe gets shut down, do you think we're able to reason and rationally think very clearly about the content that's coming into our brain? No. So we're kind of taking in all this content. We're not critically evaluating what's coming into our brain. And do you think that that might be changing us? Oh yeah, it's completely changing the way that we think, we behave, because all that stuff is coming in and we're not critically evaluating it. Plus, it also is perpetuating mental health problems because and we don't have a lot of time to really get into this, but when I look at the neurophysiology of mental health problems, what we see across the board, whether it's an anxiety disorder, a depressive disorder, etc., is that you have malfunction of the frontal lobe and you have overactivity of the emotional center. So do you see how engaging in entertainment media might perpetuate or sometimes even trigger that? In other words, what is media doing? Well, it's overstimulating, so it's causing decreased malfunction of the frontal lobe. And at the same time, overstimulation, overactivity of the emotional part of your brain. So you can start to understand how from a physiological standpoint, we see that there's a lot of reason that mental health problems actually worsen or sometimes are even triggered by excessive use of media. And what's interesting is that TV scientists show that, yes, it does feel better when you're watching TV, or using entertainment media. You feel better, right? It gives you that little, bit of a high, if you will, even if you're not noticing your high, but it feels good. But then afterwards, it is followed by a more depressed mood. So you feel good, but just like a drug, you feel better. And then after you engage in the media, especially when it's a long time or very stimulating media, there's going to be a down afterwards. Now, one example of real excessive media, or I'll say excessive dopamine stimulation, is the type of entertainment media people are using a lot of, which is pornography. So this is highly addictive. It can lead to anxiety, depression, sexual dysfunction, relationship problems, and suicidal ideation. It actually literally rewires the brain to a less mature, more juvenile state. It causes atrophy of key brain regions. No amount of porn is safe or healthy. They've actually done studies that show that in the frontal lobe region of the brain, there will be disintegration, or it will start to atrophy. And then also in that nucleus accumbens area, the part of the brain that you feel reward that we just talked about, the part of the brain that makes you feel good when you do something or you go somewhere that's exciting, that part of the brain also starts to atrophy. Okay? And they literally see this in brain scans. Your brain literally starts shrinking. And what do you think that means? Well, of course, it's going to mean that you can't reason and think as clearly, but it also means that you're not going to appreciate normal, everyday rewards. Does that make sense? So, in other words, doing things that are just like, okay, I'm going to go have tea with a friend, or I'm going to watch a sunset. And I used to enjoy those things. But if your brain is used to being so overstimulated, now when you do the simple pleasures of life, they're no longer pleasurable because they're not stimulating you to a point that your brain is used to. So real life just becomes boring. And this perpetuates the addiction. So with kids and media, this is where it's an even bigger problem than for us adults. Kids are especially vulnerable. It impairs normal development. So the recommendations that I would say for kids would be 0 screen time for children under 5, because their brains are in such a vulnerable state. And when I say 0, I mean no television. Look, if you want to show your kid under 5 like a little picture, like some pictures that you took or something, I'm not trying to be completely, how should I say, extreme. But what I am saying is really, they should not be plopped in front of the TV watching cartoons or whatever. It just is very harmful for their brain development. So you might show them an occasional little 2-minute video on YouTube or something, but you really want to keep it to the bare minimum under 5. And then no more than 1 hour of supervised use after the age of 5. So we see a huge rise in mental health problems in the younger populations. Pediatric bipolar disorder diagnosed 40 times more from 1994 to 2003. ADHD diagnoses increased by nearly 800% from 1980 to 2007. Significant increases in depression, anxiety, and suicides. And prescriptions for psych meds given to kids have sharply increased over the past several decades. So one interesting thing that we look at from the research is that, look at this. What we see here is a really strong correlation between the amount of media used and the depressive symptoms. Specifically, this study was looking at depressive symptoms in girls. And so we see here in 2010, 11, especially 11, 12, 13, what are we seeing? We're seeing a dramatic rise in problems, right? And so again, around that time, we saw a dramatic rise not only in depression, but that correlation with internet hours and social media use as well. By the way, does anyone know what happened around 2011 to 2012? Why was there such a sharp rise of internet use and social media use? Does anyone know?
Cell phones.
That's right. So 2011 to 2012 was the year that more than 50% of Americans started owning their own smartphone. So 2007, the iPhone was released, but it wasn't until 2011, 2012 that over 50% of Americans started owning a smartphone. So I think that was a big part of that. There was a lot more access for these young girls in being able to access the internet and social media. Dr. Jean Twenge has done a lot of studies on this, and she wrote a book called iGen, which is an interesting read if you really want to dive into some of the media research and how it's affected this younger generation. And she says we can apply a two-part test to possible causes of why we're seeing such a rise in mental health problems. Number one, it must be correlated with mental health issues or unhappiness. And number two, it must have changed at the same time and in the correct direction. So TV watching is linked to depression, but teens watch less TV now than they used to, so that fails test number two. Time spent on exercise and sports is linked to less depression, but it didn't change much since 2012, so they fail test number two as well. Only 3 activities pass both tests. Number one, new media screen time is linked to mental health issues and rose at the same time. Number two, in-person social interaction. And number 3, print media are linked to less unhappiness and less depression, and both have declined at the same time. So, a plausible theory includes 3 possible causes. More screen time has led directly to more unhappiness and depression. Number 2, more screen time has led to less in-person social interaction, which then led to unhappiness and depression. Number 3, more screen time has led to less print media use, leading to unhappiness and depression. In the end, all mechanisms come back to new media screen time in one way or another. So, scientists like Dr. Twenge are pointing out that when you look at that dramatic rise that we've seen over the last several years in teen mental health problems, that in one way or another, it's linked to the amount of new screen time. And most likely, it's because, yeah, that screen time directly can cause problems, but also, so I think it's kind of a combination of those 3 factors, right? It's also supplanting things that will make us more happy, like connecting with one another and even just reading old-fashioned books, right? I know I'm sounding so old-fashioned here, but you know, it's interesting. This is just what the data shows, right? And so we have to understand the data so we can make wise choices for ourselves and our family. So again, neuroscience of gaming, basically the same sort of science that we looked at with television. So again, you're engaging that orienting response, getting that dopamine hit, and the longer the engagement continues, the more permanent the changes in the dopaminergic pathways become. Brain activity is modified in such a way that natural rewards are experienced as less pleasurable, further reducing control over the behavior. So again, this is one of the scariest things to me, is that people no longer enjoy just the day-to-day like fellowship and connection. And this is why a lot of young people would rather just be holed up in their room with their games or with their phones or what have you, rather than getting out and interacting with their peers, because it doesn't give, or even other adults, etc., it doesn't give the same level of stimulation. And so what we're going to find later on is the good news is that the brain is actually plastic. The brain can change. The brain can heal. But we have to detox, just like we would any addiction, in order to allow the brain to heal and to come back to that point of appreciating more normal rewards. Now you might think, well, if you're an adult, you can get away with video games. So they actually did a study, and they found that, well, I'll mention it on the kids first. They found that the children exhibited a sustained frontal lobe suppression even after the video game. And especially if kids are playing, you know, for hours at a time, their frontal lobe can remain suppressed for hours afterwards. hours, and sometimes a full day. And so they're basically in frontal lobe suppression almost all of the time if they're gaming, especially if they're gaming for more than 4 hours per day. But what's interesting is that adults actually showed the same pattern as well. So even if you're an adult, you're going to get that sustained frontal lobe suppression. Now, some people wonder, does gaming really increase the risk of violence? And while it's true, there's no great studies that have linked gaming to overt, like kind of shooting type of violence where they're killing other individuals. Although there are, there's even some argument there because a lot of the shooters in the school shootings, et cetera, have been shown to have gaming addictions. But what we find from the research is that what is clear is that it does increase aggression, okay? And so there's a lot of data. I'm not going to read all these words that are going to pop up here in just a minute. But the bottom line is that because of that frontal lobe suppression and then the activation of the emotional center of the brain, kids will often become more aggressive. And it's not always physical aggression, okay? Sometimes it's just these aggressive sort of looks and this irritation and that sort of aggression. It's almost like a bit of a, I don't know if I'd call it, not really passive aggression, but it's an indirect, maybe not a physical violence all the time, but it is this real type of aggression that we see. And definitely decreased empathy and pro-social behavior. And so this last point here is really what I'm highlighting, leads to indirect aggression, confrontational body language, and verbal aggression. And I'll go ahead and read that highlighted part. Extensive research evidence indicates that media violence can contribute to aggressive behavior, desensitization to violence, nightmares, and fear of being harmed. And ADHD is definitely linked to increased media consumption as well. And so what we see with attention spans, they've decreased significantly since the smartphone era began. Media addiction has a similar effect to ADD and ADHD. They've done studies that show that the ability to focus is directly correlated with the proximity to a smartphone. So they took 520 students, and these students were given 2 tests on intellectual acuity. So they were testing their focus, their ability to perform this test. And the only variable was the location of the smartphone. So during the test, they either had their smartphone on the desk right there, or they had it in their pocket, or they had it, or pocket or handbag, or in a different room. And so what was interesting is that the subjects with the phones in view had the worst scores. But the ones that were not only out of sight, but it should even say here, out of the room, actually had the best scores. So the ones where it was in the bag or in the pocket, that was intermediate. But the other thing that was interesting is nearly all of these individuals said that their phones had not been a distraction. So oftentimes, when we have the phone, we don't think it's distracting us, but it is. It's almost there, like kind of occupying our subconscious attention, and it's more difficult for us to truly be present in the moment and pay attention to whatever we're doing, whether it's taking a test or spending time with our children or other family, friends, etc. It is almost a constant distraction, especially if it's there right in front of us. So if you really want to focus, the best thing to actually do is to leave your phone outside of a room. So devices in a classroom, I mean, that's pretty much ubiquitous now. They've done experiments at West Point, and they did this in the economics class. 1/3 of the cadets allowed to use laptops or tablets for note-taking. 1/3 could use them only to look at class material, and 1/3 were prohibited from using any technology. Those who used no tech did best on the final exam, And most interesting was the smartest students actually seemed to be harmed the most. And they were the biggest victims of tech because they overestimated their ability to multitask. There was a study that was published by Psychological Science on note-taking by hand or computer. Students who used a laptop did substantially poorer answering conceptual application questions. And so what we see is note-taking on the computer, even though it can be nice because you can go back, modify, etc., it doesn't quite stick the same way. Our brain processes the information better, and or worse on the computer. This is one reason I still take notes by hand. And even when I'm writing out like a sermon or something like that, I could do it on a computer, and it would be nice to be able to go back to that later. But I will literally write my notes out by hand because it uses your brain differently. It uses you understand things on a deeper level, and it does make a difference. Taking notes by hand produces superior external storage as well as superior encoding functions, which equals a better memory. Research also shows that even e-readers like Kindle are problematic. People read slower, and their recall and comprehension is impaired. So even though they can be handy, and I use e-readers, I use my phone for reading certain things, there's other things, especially when it comes to things that I really want to grapple with on a deeper level, especially spiritual things, that I like to read the actual old-fashioned version because it does tend to really sink in better. Brain scans showed that people spent more time on multiple devices in other words, when they're multitasking, had less brain density in the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex is basically a back part of the frontal lobe, and it's important for empathy and also for helping to manage our emotions in a healthy way. Clifford Noss, professor at Stanford University, studied high multitaskers and low multitaskers and showed that high multitaskers struggle immensely with a simple concentration task. So what we find is it's much better to really do one thing at a time. We can only actually focus. There's no true thing as multitasking. You can only do one thing at once. But what multitaskers do is that they jump rapidly from one task to the next. But what we do with that is we expend a significant amount of mental energy every time we jump from one task to the next. And so because of that expenditure on energy, and our brain has to kind of shift, and it takes extra time, and we have a difficult time really doing anything well when we're multitasking. Follow-up fMRI experiments showed that high multitaskers use 20 times more of their brain while engaging in the experiment, but they were using the wrong part of the brain, the visual cortex, instead of the prefrontal cortex. Again, when you're switching from one task to the other, I think part of what just occurred to me is, why the visual cortex? Because your brain is almost like really trying to be like, okay, well, what are we doing now, and what are we doing now? And so you're just trying to kind of process, and you're always in this reactive mode instead of really being in more deep thought, very intentional, etc. So we really want to get more intentional with finishing one thing and then going to the next. So high multitaskers are actually worse at multitasking. And what's really scary is that high-speed media content exposure in childhood can contribute to ADD and decreased concentration and memory, specifically by pruning certain nerve cells in the frontal lobe. And so if you use a lot of media, there's certain brain cell pathways that it appears will actually start to die off. Children may learn more from their devices than from their parents and tend to trust devices over their parents. When parents use the devices, children tend to use theirs even more. So this is an interesting study where they were looking at social media. And so far we've kind of talked about video games, we've talked about television. What about social media? Well, Facebook did some research, And you always have to be careful, who did the research, right? This is a good example of that. And they wanted to show that when used properly, social media actually makes people measurably happy. So they looked at 1,900 Facebook users, so a good amount of Facebook users, and they found that when users received information written by someone they know well, they felt better. When receiving information from someone they didn't know well, the feeling was neutral. Okay, so that was one study. So, hey, Facebook makes you happier, right? And then study 2, during a 1-week period, one group were asked to make more Facebook posts than normal, while the control group was given no instructions. The experimental group reported less loneliness than controls during this week. They felt more connected to their friends on a daily basis. So again, sounds great. I should just use more Facebook and I'll be happier and all this. But then on the other hand, now this is interesting. Again, where is this study done? At the University of Pittsburgh. Do you think they're going to have less bias than the Facebook study? Yes, right? They don't have a dog in the hunt, really. So researchers at the University of Pittsburgh found that the more subjects used social media, the more likely they were to be lonely. Study 2, 5,200 subjects studied associations between Facebook activity and self-reported measures of physical health, mental health, and life satisfaction. Our results show that overall the use of Facebook was negatively associated with well-being. So which is right? How do we resolve this paradox? And so again, this is why it's so important when we look at research, we can't just trust a study and take it always at face value. We need to understand, who did this, where did it come from, etc. So, resolving the paradox. The studies that found positive results focused on specific behaviors of social media users. Negative studies, on the other hand, focused on the net result of overall use of these media platforms. Holly Shakya, researcher at UC San Diego, said in an NPR interview, "We have evidence that replacing your real-world relationships with social media use is detrimental to your well-being." So the point being, yeah, when you get feedback on a post, or you do stuff on social media and you feel kind of connected, that can make you feel temporarily a little better, right? But if that is starting in any way to replace the time for real world relationships, it's going to be a detriment. Does that make sense to everybody? And so we're kind of saying, this makes me feel better, and so it's okay, but what we don't realize is okay, maybe temporarily it makes me feel just a little bit better, but if I did the real thing, it would make me feel this much better. Now we have a problem, right? Because you see that big discrepancy. So use of the internet or gaming throughout the day, even for social media, actually increases social anxiety. Online, you can create your self-image. In real social settings, you have to do what? You actually have to be your real self. And that's hard, because social media, we can paint this picture. We can show just what we want to show, and in real life, it's harder to kind of hide behind all the nice pictures and all the glamour and all of that. So, what do you think is worse? Interactive or passive screen time?
Yes.
Yeah, so most people think passive, I'm talking about television, more things that you just kind of kick back and watch. But in reality, research actually points to the fact that interactive is more dysregulating to the nervous system. Because interactive, when you were gaming and we're interacting with our device, it's even more stimulating. You get more dopamine hits. And so this actually is more dysregulating to the nervous system, leads to hyperarousal. For example, just 30 minutes of interactive screen time triggered sleep problems, while it took TV use 2 hours to have the same effect in one study. Another issue that we're starting to see is that people, as they use more screens and stare at more screens instead of people's faces, what does this do? This actually decreases the ability to read facial expressions, our social abilities start to reduce, our empathy starts to reduce. Because how do we learn empathy? How do we learn to interact socially? It's by doing it. Our mirror neurons are stimulated like when we interact with each other, when we see someone doing something, etc. But if we're busy staring primarily at a screen, we're not going to have that same brain activity going on, and we lose the ability to really empathize with one another or socialize properly. And this can lead to a sense of isolation and disconnection. And then, you know, one other major concern I have, just from a real spiritual standpoint, well, I'll ask you, what's it omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, and full of light? God, right? But so is our iPhone in some respects. and you think about that. I mean, think about omniscient. Like, how much does it know, right? Where does it go? Everywhere with us. How powerful is it that I can pull this device out, I can order something from Amazon, have it show up at my house in 1 or 2 days, or I can order food and have it come right away. All I have to do is go online or make a phone call. I mean, you start understanding the power that's right here in my pocket, right? Amazing. And the knowledge that's there. And so you can start to see how this can actually start replacing the very place that God should actually even have in our minds and in our hearts. So it can really start turning into even a spiritual problem for many of us. And you know, our cell phone is like it's with us everywhere, and we're checking it. On average, Americans check their phones 344 times per day. That's once every 4 minutes. And don't forget, 64% use their phone on the toilet. So if you do that, you're not alone. I hear some nervous laughter out there. Okay. So what are some signs of addiction? Constantly checking the phone, aimless clicking and scrolling, binge watching TV shows or short videos, social isolation or conflict, diminished enjoyment of simple pleasures of life, trouble focusing, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, or irritability. Cal Newport is a digital media expert. He's written several things on the topic, and he actually wrote a book called Digital Minimalism. And he says that digital minimalism allows you to focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected activities that support things you value, then happily miss out on everything else. So what he's saying is, look, I know we got to use media, we got to use digital devices. This is part of life nowadays, but we have to figure out how to use them in a way where they're not controlling our lives. They're not supplanting what we really value the most. So he recommends a digital detox. And a digital detox can reset your brain and help you enjoy normal life again. And so what we suggest is doing a 30-day fast from non-essential screen time. After the fast, aim for no more than 1.5 hours of non-essential screen time per day. So when I say non-essential, this would be like work-related screen time. So studies show that if you get that above 1.5 hours of entertainment media, whether it's social media, movies, television, video gaming, etc., above an hour and a half per day is where you really start having more of the mental health problems. And so you want to define your tech rules to do this fast. So you identify all the digital technologies you use. You decide which of these are optional, and you can temporarily step away without creating harm or major problems in your personal or professional life. And then some technologies you can abstain from altogether. And for those that you still choose to use during this digital detox, you want to have an operating procedure that dictates exactly when and how to use the technology. You want to write this down and put it somewhere you will see it every day. So I did my own digital declutter. And so what I did is I looked at everything that I use. So I looked at all the apps, I looked at the time on the email, the time on, yeah, the phone. For me, it's just mainly my phone and my computer. We don't have a television that we use at home. Trying to think if there was anything else. No, so I just defined strict rules for myself during my digital declutter of that 30 days so that I could then kind of take a step back from my digital media use. So I said I will not use WhatsApp except to check twice weekly to connect with a cousin in Germany who recently had a baby. I will not use my email app on my phone. I already did away with my news app a few months ago. I found myself compulsively checking my news app. So this was when, you know, the heated election was going on and all of that, and I was like, and I realized I'm getting like a compulsion here, and so I'm going to delete it. And that made it so much easier. I didn't even miss it. I was like, this is great, I'm free. And then text messaging, instead of checking like throughout the day, I decided to do batch checking. I will check in the morning, at lunch, after work, and in the evening after the kids in the bed. Will not text while driving. And then what about my map app? I kind of put a question there. Basically, I decided I'm only going to use it when I absolutely need it. I'm going to actually try to remember where I'm going, which I used to be better, I think, with directions before the map apps, right? Will not surf the internet after work. The weather app will check no more than once per day. I found that, you know, within the same day, the weather usually doesn't change dramatically, so I'm pretty good checking it once a day. Replace any additional time with connecting more deeply with my wife and children and reading books that support this connection. So that actually it was an interesting process when I went through that, and it was very helpful. Even though I wouldn't say that I'm, you know, a high media user, I noticed a difference. It helped me just to take a step back and be like, you know what? I don't need to be like, if I have a spare moment, constantly jumping to my email or doing this or that. And I need to actually give myself, like, slow it down a little bit. You know, allow myself to be more present instead of just always in this frantic, almost fight or flight mode, engaging with technology. So then after the digital detox, you want to reintroduce technology. Only let back into your life tech that passes your strict minimalist standards. And you only reintroduce how many things? One thing at a time. So you want to, as you reintroduce things, you want to see how's this affecting me? Am I, utilizing it properly and making sure that we are, again, controlling it and the time with that rather than it controlling us. So we want to ask ourselves, does this technology serve something I deeply value? Does it really help support that? Is this the best way to support this value? Because again, Facebook might support that value of relationships, but is it the best way? If I can pick up the phone or if I can go see somebody in person, maybe I should focus on that instead of just hopping on Facebook, right? And that doesn't mean that you can't use Facebook at all or any social media, but what it means is we want to really be careful how we use it, okay? And then what is my standard operating procedure for this technology? This specifies when and how I will use it. So benefits of the detox, you start enjoying the simple pleasures of life again, more stable mood, deeper connection with others, enhanced ability to focus, more time for other goals in life, and better sleep. One resource that I want to point, especially parents, to is a good book by Victoria Dunkley called Reset Your Child's Brain. And this also helps significantly with helping children to do the detox. Because guess what? Kids, do you think they're going to do their own digital detox by themselves? No, because remember, their frontal lobe, their self-control part of their brain is not very well developed, and so they need us to help be their frontal lobe, okay? And there's quite a bit I could say on that. I'm going to skip a few slides here. I apologize just because of time. So basically, with this Child Reset program, what you're doing here is, again, a digital declutter, an electronic fast. You're eliminating screen time for 3 weeks. and you're replacing that screen time with positive activities. And so that within the first week, what you typically see is improved mood and attitude and starting to sleep better. Although the first few days, sometimes things can get worse, okay, because they're withdrawing. After several weeks and months, you start seeing profound improvements in social, emotional, and cognitive development with improved critical thinking and self-control and better emotional management, better social engagement, and emotional intelligence. Dr. Dunkley's 3 most important rules: keep the bedroom free of all screen devices, use a wired desktop workstation. This is increasingly difficult to find, but the point being, you want your technology to be stationary in one place rather than roving all around the house. You want to have a defined place for them to use it. And defined time, obviously, as well. And then number 3, model the screen rules yourself. So what change is needed? Well, we want to focus on high quality leisure time, because sometimes we talk about the evils of technology, and then we take something away, especially with kids, but then they're like, well, what am I supposed to do now, right? So there's so many things that we can replace that with, and so what we want to do is especially look at what the research shows promotes happiness and mental health. So high quality leisure time. So doing things that you really, well, here's a few examples, right? Spending time with friends and family, reading a book, either to yourself or to the children, music, playing or listening, games, puzzles, exploring a new hobby or interest. And the one there, the second bullet point is solitude. And I like the definition of solitude that says solitude is when our mind is free from the input of other minds. And so when we have quiet time to really think, to reflect, and sure, we can, of course, connect with the divine mind during that time, but how often do we really have solitude nowadays? A lot of times, even if we're in our cars or doing other things, we're doing what? We're listening to podcasts or, so it's like constant bombardment of information. It's important to have some time for quiet, to think, to reflect, to reconnect with what really matters. All right, this is my last slide. So choosing the best. So research shows clearly that religious activities increase and improve mental health. So engagement in religious activities, both ourselves and our children. Family meal times without devices. This is tremendous when it comes to long-term outcomes with kids, is just bonding over a meal. It's very helpful. Time in nature, also extremely helpful. Time in nature, I also believe, really helps in that resetting the brain. And so that, because nature is stimulating, but at a much lower level, and so it allows the brain to heal in a really wonderful way. Exercise is huge. The more exercise kids get and adults get, the better for our brain. And spending time talking, connecting, and I didn't put it on here, but especially with young people, I mentioned it yesterday, we want to try to get them involved, right? We want to try to get them involved in church activities. We want to even get them involved in some leadership roles and get them involved in the family and see how can they really engage, participate, and know that they are contributing to what is being done in our families and in our churches and our communities, and know that they're making a difference. This will really give them a healthy dopamine stimulus without the letdown, without the addiction, and really foster that sense of connection. All right, well that is it. Again, I want to encourage all of us to remember technology is not inherently evil, but we want to learn to utilize it in a healthy way so that it can truly serve us instead of feeling like we're enslaved to that technology. Really appreciate all of your warm welcome here in Rochester. Thanks so much for inviting us and the whole team. And I really wish all the best for you and your families. And I did want to emphasize that we do have a lot of online resources more and more. And I think this has been mentioned, but just in case you missed it, we are just now launching our online depression, overcoming anxiety and depression program, which will include a lot of the things that we've talked about this weekend and much, much more in helping individuals to overcome mental health problems. And one of the most exciting things to me about this program is even though it is online, it's also going to be interactive. And so there's going to be, each person will be assigned a live coach who will be interfacing with the individual as they go through the different videos and helping them to complete the work and then coaching them in their process of healing. So if you or someone you know is interested in that, you can pick up a flyer on that program, because I know it's hard to come all the way to California for treatment, but we want to give more and more options to people that are around America. So thank you for your attention, and may God bless you.